Welcome to Linux Matters, a podcast featuring three experienced open source professionals as we discuss the impact Linux has on our daily lives. This is episode 40 and I'm Alan. This week, we've been reading all your feedback.
Hello, I'm Martin.
Hello, and I'm Mark.
So let's get started. The first topic is Subsonic. We had a lot of feedback about this.
We did. So after I mentioned I was looking for Subsonic apps with Android Auto support, half of the world got in touch.
The ones that use Android, right?
Yeah, exactly. Got in touch to recommend Symfonium, which eager-eared listeners will know is the one that I landed on in between the recording where I said I was looking for a new app and everyone's sending me the feedback. So I actually managed to land on the same conclusion that everyone else did at the same time, which was quite good. I'm obviously in good company. And
it's interesting that in the notes that you've got here, the word Symfonium is spelt two different ways. So yeah, good luck finding that.
Yes. Android Auto pronounces it Symfonium.
Ah, brilliant.
I also mentioned that I didn't want to install an Android app via an APK from GitHub because I didn't want the faff of having to manually update it, after which the other half of the world got in touch to tell me about an Android app store called Obtainium, which lets you add Android apps from other sources, including from GitHub, and when a new version is published to supported sources, it will handle the updates for you.
So as deb-get is to Ubuntu, Obtainium is to Android.
Yes, basically. I haven't had cause to use it yet because the apps I've landed on are in the Play Store or in F-Droid. But in the future, I might give it a go. We also had an email from Paul via the contact form on our website who, on the topic of subsonic servers, suggested Funkwhale.
I feel we're being trolled and people are just throwing random names at us.
No, this is a genuine project. So this is an audio server which is designed to be federated, so it supports ActivityPub, but it also supports Subsonic. The crucial thing about this is it supports multiple accounts with separate libraries. So I was saying that I wanted to be able to give my daughter access to a subset of our overall music library while I had access to everything. So this is a possibility for that. I have had a look at it and it is available to install via Docker, but it deploys its own cluster of containers. So I need to do a bit of thinking about how that fits into my existing setup. But I'll probably look at it in the future. You might hear about it again on another episode.
And we also had some feedback from Clint via the contact form talking about Navid Drone.
So Navid Drone is the server that I currently use. And Clint was asking about exposing it to the internet by putting it behind a reverse proxy, which is exactly what I do. So he suggested the Trafic.
It's pronounced traffic.
Is it pronounced traffic?
Yeah,
all right,
of course,
then.
Yes.
Reverse proxy, which is a very popular reverse proxy, which people use for stuff like this. I use Nginx, as I've discussed in the past, for doing exactly this, so I can access it from wherever I have. Basically all of my stuff that's hosted on my Wise server is behind Nginx, which means I can access it from wherever and also internally.
Cool.
So while we're on the topic of reverse proxies, because I think this comes up a bit later as well, I use a similar way of doing reverse proxies, but I use Caddy as the reverse proxy. But what I've done these days is I've turned off all port forwarding at my router, and I have Caddy automatically talk to the Tailscale API and provision Let's Encrypt certificates. And I do everything over Tailscale and just connect the VPN up so I don't have to expose anything to the internet.
Right. So it is all behind one box, but it's not public.
Yeah.
Moving on, that jewel up is the gift that keeps on giving. Mark Unwin contacted us via the form on the website.
Yeah, so Mark says that after hearing about the dual up monitor setup, he suggested that we check out Synergy. It allows for a single keyboard mouse to control multiple PCs across platforms. So by simply moving the mouse across monitors, you can have it connected to like your Linux machine and your Mac machine, and control moves seamlessly between the different devices. Now, this is something I have on my to-do list of projects Martin needs to take a look at one day. There's Synergy, which I think is a commercial application, and I think there's a fork of it called Barrier from when Synergy had an open source license. So yes, I agree, Mark Unwin. That is definitely something I should be taking a look at in the future.
I have definitely used one of those before. When I still had two separate monitors, one above the other, I did for a while have a Raspberry Pi plugged into one and my laptop plugged into the other, and I had whichever one of these it was. You basically say, this computer is at the top and this computer is at the bottom, and as you go to the bottom of the screen, your cursor just magically appears at the top of the other screen.
Magically? Wow.
Yes.
Fancy.
Ellis on Discord back in August points the finger at you, Martin.
Yes, they say, this podcast made me buy new monitors. They also purchased 2 LG dual-up monitors.
We should get some sort of kickback for this, shouldn't we?
Well, I didn't think that putting, referral codes in our show notes was the thing to be done, but I regret not doing it now.
No, well, I do it all the
time. Anyway, they at the time they said they were waiting for them to ship, but then they sent a photograph a little while later, and their setup is very similar to how I have my 2 dual-ups arranged side by side. And they say, I blame the host of Linux Matters podcast for me getting them. Blame or thank them. It's a thin line.
They've got an interesting keyboard.
Yes, this did trigger questions about the keyboard and display compatibility on Linux in the photos, and Ellis responded.
Yeah, he's using an Ergo Docs from Falber.tech, apparently. I've never heard of any of this stuff. With a Zelius Zliant V2 switch.
Again, we're being trolled. These are not real things.
And then they have a custom US Dvorak keyboard with extra scroll lock keys mapped to compose. I mean, this is the most bespoke keyboard configuration I think I've ever come across.
I've never used my normal scroll lock key, never mind multiple ones.
Yeah.
But in good news,
they are using NixOS, and I did see from the photo that they're using one of these fancy Wayland compositors. They're using Sway.
Nice.
So, yeah, they're using their laptop with that and Thunderbolt 4 cable all hooked up. And I think this was some commentary similar to my sort of own astonishment about how well these monitors work when you just suddenly switch them around and it cuts the resolution in half and switches things around and it all just works. And they were saying, yeah, monitor compatibility has been excellent.
Cool. An interloper called Martin, via the contact form, said, as a fellow Linux enthusiast, I've also been working on consistent theming. Have you explored using Hyperland with Waybar and Ro-Fi? They all run on Wayland through Hyperland and can be tricky to set up on Ubuntu, especially with NVIDIA hardware. I know someone called Martin who's been monkeying around with stuff like this.
Yes, I think the next couple of podcasts that we record, I'm going to be talking about my experiences with Hyperland, its first-party ecosystem, and then the sort of extended ecosystem of Wayland compositor tooling. So stay tuned for that.
Will that put an end to you waving that laptop under my nose every day at work?
I know you want it. I know you like it and you think it's pretty.
Yes, I do. Anarchy Inc. via the contact form said,
I loved hearing about HeyNote, which is a crazy useful scratch pad. However, it made me remember that you can do this in Joplin as well by simply doing 3 backticks and the language of the fenced text. Now, is this the same thing? I think here they're talking about like formatting a block of code, whereas you were talking about blocks in HeyNote and trying to describe what they meant, Martin. Is that the same thing?
Similar. So I think what they're describing here is how you can have code blocks and you can have different syntax styling for the pre-formatted bit of code in your markdown. So you can have 3 backticks shell for your bash script and 3 backticks Python for your Python, and things get syntax highlighted. HeyNote works a little differently. Each block you assign like a language markup, so you can have very different types of content like mathematical equations or charts and graphs or Python code or Markdown or SQL or whatever. It's similar.
It sounds very similar to the WordPress Gutenberg system of having blocks.
Yeah.
And a block is formatted and behaves differently depending upon the type of block it is.
Yeah. And what I will say is HeyNote is By far my favourite application find this year. I think it was Chris somebody in our Telegram that recommended it, and I'm forever indebted. And I've been following the Git commits in HeyNote. It's currently released as 1.8, but in 2.0, they're adding multiple buffer support, so you can use HeyNote as a general note-taking tool to manage all of your Markdown notes.
2 files open at once? Unfathomable.
This could persuade me to maybe convert my note-taking once more from Joplin to HeyNote, so stay tuned for when HeyNote 2.0 is out.
That episode will go out, and then I'll switch from Sublime Text that I'm currently using to HeyNote, I guess, once you've given it a good shake. Thank you.
This episode is sponsored by Tailscale, but get your finger away from that skip button. I'm going to explain how I use the free Tailscale personal plan to host global LAN parties and why you, fellow Linux enthusiasts, should check it out. Tailscale effortlessly provides the benefits of WireGuard without the hassle of manually configuring it. My office in town is seamlessly connected to our home LAN using Tailscale subnet routing, which is just a tick box configuration. It made it simple to set up Syncthing for off-site backups without exposing them to the public internet. I instantly switch between work and home tailnets to connect to the resources I need, and I even share a tailnet with friends in other countries to create a LAN to play old games that only offer multiplayer over local networks. Loads of the Late Night Linux family hosts are using Tailscale to make complex configurations easier than melting butter with a lightsaber. And you could too, because the Tailscale personal plan will always be free. To support the show and become a networking Jedi, try Tailscale for free today. You'll get up to 100 devices and 3 users for free with no credit card required at tailscale.com/Linux Matters. That's tailscale.com/Linux Matters.
Linux Matters is part of the Late Night Linux family. If you enjoy the show, please consider supporting us and the rest of the Late Night Linux team using the PayPal or Patreon links at linuxmatters.sh/support. For $5 a month on Patreon, you can enjoy an ad-free feed of our show, or for $10 get access to all the Late Night Linux shows ad-free. You can get in touch with us via email, show@linuxmatters.sh, or chat with other listeners in our Telegram group. All the details are at linuxmatters.sh/contact. Robin, via the contact form, said...
First, thank you for a great podcast. Oh, thanks, Robin. In episode 30, you talked about Notify and different ways of getting notified about things in your environments. I've built and maintained DocCheck, a simple application to manage updates on your Dockers. I recently implemented a way to get notified when there's updates, and people contributed different snippets to use as plugins to other services, among them Notify, but also a wonderful project called Apprise. So I was talking in that episode about having my server tell me when things are updated and jobs run and stuff like that. And one of the things is updating all of my Docker containers, which happens once a week. And so this is another tool for doing that. So I will take a look at it. Thank you, Robin.
I've got into this Docker thing. I've now written things that deploy and stand up all kinds of stuff in Docker. I'll have to talk about that in another show because I can't talk about that right now.
Yeah, you really will. I had to challenge his identity.
Yes. Christopher Altona via the contact form also was interested in Nifty and said there's another for the backup type jobs being talked about called healthchecks.io. Instead of an active notification, you tell the site how often it should receive messages from your job, and if it doesn't receive a message within a threshold of whatever you set, then it notifies you. That means you only get notified when something is wrong instead of always.
So this is like a dead man's switch for backup failure.
Or a canary.
All right then, canary.
Yes.
Yeah, canaries are alive. Dead men are not.
Yes.
Initially.
This is a complement to what I've got, I think, rather than a replacement, because I had a few people say about this, you don't want it to tell you when it ran, you want it to tell you when it didn't run. But I don't just get a notification to say it ran. I get a notification to say it ran and here's what it did. So I get a little report, for example, for my backup. I get the output from rclone and I can see which files were transferred and how much data. So if I take a quick look and it's suddenly tons of data and I didn't think I'd added that much, I can think, maybe I need to look at that and have a clean up and stuff like that.
I think they have a good point, though, because if you start getting notified all day, every day about things being successful, you ignore it after a while.
Yes, yeah. So there's definitely a place for things like this as well. Yeah, definitely.
Another topic that came up on Discord, Greg H. asked, can anyone recommend a good IP camera for use with a self-hosted DVR or security server? I'm also interested in thoughts on the server. I'm leaning towards ZoneMinder, but I'm still in the research phase. And username undefined, that's actually what they're called, responded with a couple of suggestions of indoor/outdoor security cameras. And we'll put the links in the show notes. And it's funny, they mentioned ZoneMinder. That's one of those pieces of software that just fell out of my head. I don't know why. I mean, I've not got any kind of video monitoring server, but now I want one. I went in the loft the other day and found a couple of IP cameras that I used to have and I used to use. And I was thinking, bit of RTMP, stream it to ZoneMinder. Maybe that's a good idea.
The camera that I bought to use as a baby monitor, which is from Tapo.
That well-known high street brand, yes.
Well, it's a Netgear brand.
Yeah.
Right.
I believe it's the C102, possibly. That might be the wrong number. But anyway, that supports a protocol called ONVIF, ONVIF, which is a standard protocol for CCTV control and management. So you can get lots of devices that support that protocol and server software that can then talk to all of those devices by this protocol, as well as standard RTMP streaming.
Yeah, I've not touched ZoneMinder in forever. I helped my father-in-law set it up, I don't know, at least 15 years ago, I think, on an Ubuntu server. But it was before we got into IP stuff, so it was very long HDMI cables going into a multi-port capture card.
Nothing wrong with very long HDMI cables. I've got one going all the way around my lounge. Speaking of getting media from one place to another, Patrick D on Discord said,
I've been using Jellyfin for a couple of years now. I switched from Plex after it refused to rescan my library after I added some stuff. Now I figured that lack of hairpin NAT was a problem for Chromecast, it all works brilliantly. Turns out that Google do DNS over HTTPS to their servers for all their Chromecast devices. The Jellyfin app on Google TV 4K works great.
What is hairpin NAT?
I do not know. Martin?
No, I don't know the details either, but what I do recognise is this talk of DNS over HTTPS. And whilst I've been setting up my new home server, one of the changes I've made to our network infrastructure is I've moved everything to DNS over HTTPS as a result to make this media streaming stuff work a bit more reliably.
That does get in the way of things like AdGuard for ad blocking on devices, doesn't it?
It could do. And what I've done to work around that is Molvad DNS has an ad blocking component, and I use that as my resolution for the public internet. And I use their ad blocked version of their DNS servers over DNS over HTTPS in order to keep all of that going.
I see.
Wunderbar. Continuing the topic of Plex, GNU2 Linux, also on Discord, says, Plex Media Server works great on Linux Mint, but only if one attaches the external drive that your media is onto to mnt/drive name. It had all kinds of permission issues when I tried to install it to /media username drive name like I normally do with most external drives. The app for Fire TV 4K is free and nice to be able to browse and play my library of videos with my remote control on my TV. I wonder if this is a snap permissions problem.
I think it sounds very much like a snap permissions problem.
On Linux Mint, didn't they ban snaps?
Yeah, but some cheeky interlopers figured out how you could apt install Snapd and actually get the snaps that you want on your own system without somebody else telling you whether you should or not. Anyway, moving on. Hecky sent us some contact via the form on our website.
Yeah, and they said they were listening to episode 28 about Mark's Wake on LAN project in order to start his Plex server. And it says it sounds like after you start your Plex server, you have it shut down after a controlled period of time. Is that how it works, Mark?
It shuts down on a cron job at a particular time.
Aha.
So when I know that power is going to be more expensive again, if the server is on, it turns itself off.
Okay, and they say 2 years ago, caused by the high energy prices in Germany, they wrote a similar tool that shuts down and suspends to RAM their home server if it hits a sort of a predefined idle metric state. That sounds pretty cool. In fact, I like the sound of I should do that but in the summer because it gets too hot. Yeah.
So he goes on to talk about doing this with TV Headend, which is a streaming server for TV. And I did actually used to do this on my original Steam box.
Right.
In the living room. I also ran TV Headend as a PVR, but I had it set up so if you scheduled a recording, that would set the BIOS clock so that if you shut it down, it would use the BIOS clock to wake it up when you scheduled the recording.
Oh, to wake itself up.
Yeah.
And then it would basically watch to see if it had an active stream. And then if it didn't have an active stream anymore, it would turn itself off and set the BIOS clock for the next wake up time.
Is TV Headend like a Myth TV component?
No, it's a separate project and much, much easier to configure.
Oh my gosh. Flashbacks to setting up Myth TV. Good Lord.
Tuning it in and getting the EPG working.
Yeah, that was always the thing. That was all the feedback we had for this episode. If you've got memories of difficult to tune in things or other things you want to tell us about, then all the contact details are on our website, linuxmatters.sh. See you all back next time with a normal episode.